I'm here today with Rick Prashaw. Rick is a Canadian author and storyteller. He has a diverse career, including a journalist, a Catholic priest, executive director of a national church council on justice and corrections, and also political staff to 3 federal members of parliament. Rick did theology and biblical studies at St. Peter's Seminary in London, Ontario, and he is a specialist in institutional ministry. The staff, including Rick at the Church Council on Justice, won the National Ron Weeb Award for a book they wrote called Satisfying Justice. The award recognized the book for ways of transforming human relationships by enabling and promoting communication and healing between people in conflict, be they victims, offenders, colleagues, families, or neighbors. Rick joins us today mostly to talk about his first memoir, which is called Sore Adam Sore, a remarkable tale about his late son Adam, whose resiliency and humor steeled him through an epic journey of epilepsy and gender identity. Adam would be an organ donor saving 4 different lives, and the man who has his heart now is friends with Rick. All of that story and reviews are on his website at www.rickprashaw.com. Rick, it's really a pleasure to have you join us today. He's in Ottawa, Canada, and he's in the process of working on another book. So we'll be able to talk about that too. So Rick, thanks so much.
Hi, Brian. This is a great joy to have a chat with you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, I'm really glad that we connected. Tell us a little bit about, some of those different things that I touched on briefly that, comprise your past.
I laugh listening to my life in this crooked straight journey. I remember being at a cottage once. I was a priest then, and there was this talk that the average person would have 9 careers in their life. And I remember saying to myself, not I. I'm pretty stuck here and in a good place. I think it was 2 at that time, but I'm just laughing because I think I'm getting very close to 9, which is the average. And in it all, whether it be journalism or the priesthood or that national ministry for social justice, there was a lot of work within the criminal justice system. There's still underpinning it. There was the core faith, the good news of just whether it be healing or inclusion or justice. These are themes that worked itself out, and there was always the writing and the storytelling. That was whether I was in the pulpit or writing for a newspaper or sometimes in front of the mics or behind the mics with the members of parliament. It was always the telling of our story, and that has always been at the core of my life.
Well, you've done some really interesting things. There's no question about that. I'm jealous in some sense because you've got to put your toe into several different, segments of the world, which had to have been fascinating.
Well, in this book that I'm writing now, I talk about my astonishment at still standing, that I'm still standing, and I'll put that more on Grace's side and on the creator side than my side. But it is amazing that the faith has been a faith in myself in a good way, in the sense of a belief in myself that there was something good there to share and to write about. So and always with some humor, some sense of really keeping it grounded in all the storytelling in the books that I write.
So I'd like to dive into a little bit about your earlier book that we mentioned, Satisfying Justice. Are there any programs that are in existence today that do the kind of conflict resolution, that sounds like you wrote about in that book?
Well, good question, Brian. They regrettably are on the periphery of the system. I mean, typically punishment, prison remains the only game or the serious game in town. And we were there trying to demonstrate how could you have some serious, reparative, restorative responses and include the victims, take very seriously the offender's actions. It's not a question of a slap on a wrist, but hold people accountable in a life way, rather than simply thinking that this sentence, which only creates a criminal record and only often makes things worse and sometimes has nothing to do with rehabilitation, when we lock the door of the prison cell and forget more or less until these people come back, and most do come back. So we did here right in Ottawa, put a pilot project in place where we gain the confidence over time with judges and police officers and prosecutors, and increasingly they started to like that kind of justice that was not this revolving door of justice of the courts and prisons, where the police officers, very hardened ones, would come away and say, I'll take that any day. You know, that everybody gets a say, a voice, the community fashions a sentence. And increasingly it went from the light stuff, you know, the nonviolent stuff, to bank holdups and armed robbery and hostage taking situations. One woman wanted to meet the person who had murdered her son in prison, and that was facilitated. So there was staff that was resourced and you know, hired, and it came under the umbrella of restorative justice. But regrettably, I still find both in the United States and Canada, it's still there on the periphery of the system. For all kinds of reasons. But we wanted to tell stories. We told the story of a young man who was impaired one night and ended up taking a life, a vehicular homicide. And the judge decided that a 750-hour community sentence would be tough on him, very tough on him, very personal, but would be far more meaningful and helpful as he went to high school students and in the community to talk about it. So people usually have to check it out to make sure that it really is serious and that, you know, the offender does take it seriously. But it was a book that we told, and typical of me, I find that the story is far better than the theory or the doctrine or the dogma. The stories flesh this out and bring everything to life.
Very cool. Very cool. So tell us more about Adam. He sounded like he was just an amazing person, but went through quite a set of challenges.
Some people hear me and they say, "Oh, you're just the greatest dad, and you were just such a good parent." And I say, "Oh, you obviously haven't read the book yet," because I said my unconditional love came with about 10,000 screams as a father and as a dad. He had a wicked sense of humor. I appreciated it sometimes. He was this young guy that, you know, there's the organ donor story to talk about. There's the epilepsy. There's his gender journey. But he's just your regular kid that you see on the street, the shopping malls, at our dining room tables. Ball cap on back, the phone in his hand, the tattoos. He had too many tattoos as far as Dad was concerned. But he was just this joyful human being that he had a lot of reasons in life to have a chip on his shoulder, with the seizures, with the learning disabilities, but he always seemed to jump up off the canvas. He just seemed to go back to his sunny place. So he is the co-author in the book, a book I wrote after he died. It was a seizure-related drowning in a hot tub at 22, because I went back to his Facebook. I was his friend on Facebook. Some days I just ducked and shook my head, you know, at some of the posts and just continued to like him and love him. But I've taken a lot of his posts and they're in the margins on all the various pages. And sometimes they have something to do with what I'm writing about. And other times it's just him showing up with his humor or his love for his Montreal Canadiens hockey team or Batman, his superhero. And he just is Adam, you know, in the book. So he's the co-author, thanks to this Facebook post that I was going to paraphrase him. And since his death, I just have to say it, he speaks to me. I wish he was around in a very physical way, but he does message me and speak to me. And one night on the pillow seems to be his favorite place where to message me. He just said, "Dad, use my words." It was just so clear, like he didn't want any paraphrasing. He said, "Use my words." So yeah, he is the co-author, and I tell his whole story. I tell the story of his being born. I'd been a Catholic priest. I chose to get married for love, and immediately I'm a stepfather to 3 children. And Suzanne, the mom, announces we're going to have a baby, and she announces that it's a boy in the womb, very early, before ultrasound. And I go, how, what? And she says, oh, it's so much like David's pregnancy. It's not at all like the 2 girls. And so we called the boy Adam in the womb. And lo and behold, 17 minutes of labor, which was a bit of a harbinger of this kid's life, out comes this beautiful baby girl, as the intern announced. And that's the beginning of the story. And 70,000 words on it. And if you remember Scout in To Kill a Mockingbird, or what's another one? Tatum O'Neal, the pitcher in Bad News Bears. That was my that was Adam to a T. And he just took us on a journey. And I had no manual, like none of us do as parents, but as they say in the preface, I listened, I learned, and I loved, along with those screams.
What a saga that had to have been and still is, it sounds like. So so tell us about the new book that you're writing.
Yes, it's called Father Rick, Roaming Catholic, ROAMIN, Roaming Catholic. And it's not in any way at all a denigration in terms of those years exclusively or more narrowly within my Catholic faith, because I have some very good stories to tell and some very good memories of that. But it's just that crooked straight journey to Heaven's Gate, and just the bigness of God, and that I remember as a priest, I used to go to Chicago for the liturgical conference called The Gathering. And one year I heard Edwina Gately speak, and she became a favorite of mine. I went there every year. But here was this prim, proper British theologian, storyteller, working on the streets of Chicago with women caught up in prostitution. And she would talk to us about God is big, and about her experience of God, beyond the dogma, beyond the Bible, beyond the debates and all that stuff. It was her experience of God. And that really struck a chord in me that it's almost like I couldn't not believe because it's just this experience, that I have. And I was in a pulpit for years. I proselytized, the whole thing. But to me, it's a storytelling now. Just to tell my stories, and they brush up against other people's stories, and other people, the audience, the listeners, the readers, they will make of it what they will make of it, so it's not yet published. Hopefully next year we'll get a publisher. We're just finishing it now, but it's a 50-year faith memoir, and I felt like a dinosaur writing it. So one day on my dog walk, I got this inspiration, I believe, to write it telling my story to my goddaughter niece, who's 40, who has a 12-year-old biracial son, sitting in Holy Week on Good Friday, as she's asking me all these questions about Holy Week and ashes, and she forgets some things. And so I start to tell her story, tell my story, 2020 in the pandemic. And so it was a huge leap forward in my writing, that I didn't have to, go back and write it as if it was a 50-year story. I'm telling it today to a niece and to her son, and with the pandemic, with Black Lives Matter, with a whole lot of social justice stuff, weaving it into it. So, that's
interesting. That sounds fascinating, the way that you told it.
Yeah.
So
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that back on Adam's story, you must know this. I mean, working so much like you do in your passion for books and authors and stuff. I think it's human nature too. We all want to label something. We want to understand something. So we have to figure out what section a book goes in, and is it this, is it that? And the media does this a lot. So I had no problem with the book getting very prominently displayed in the LGBTQ, pride, and transgender world. There was nothing wrong with that. But there was one podcaster, one author who just out of the blue called it a love story. And I just felt like all the lights went on, as soon as she said that. She said, your love for your son, your family's love, this acceptance, this unconditional, it's a love story. And so I started using that in the book tour. And then one day it dawned on me to add the part that it wasn't just our love for Adam, but it was Adam's love for himself. And I think what drove Adam was his determination, his resiliency, his courage, but his belief that he wanted to be who he was, and he wanted to love who he loved. And I always said to myself, that sounds good to me. I mean, I think that's what I want. And so I think Adam should have it, and the others should have it. And what it did for me in my talks is to again, I have no problem going there. People want to talk about transgender, but I still see it as a label. And I wanted to put a human being, a face, a person, a story, and I think that's the power of that book. That when people use labels, I said, read this. Just read. Here's one story, And I think that's. I joked with the bookstore owners. I said, "Oh, just put it at the front door there. That'll be just really." That'll be perfect place for it. I said, it doesn't belong in any one section,
So both with that book as well as the early one, Satisfying Justice, how did you get those published?
How?
Yeah, were they self-published or traditional?
Well, Satisfying Justice, of course, is with a non-government organization. We got funding through Corrections Canada, so that was a different story. But in terms of this book, it was really my first book that I would sort of shop around, and Dundurn Press is the publisher. It's a pretty significant Canadian indie publisher, and they did the magic of it. One of the things that forever grateful for Dundurn is the cover, which you probably can peek at over my shoulder there.
Yes.
And it's a remarkable story because Adam died January 22nd, 2016. At 3:52 in the afternoon, he's in his hot tub in his very special place up in the penthouse of his apartment building, and he posts that picture. And the seizure that would take his life probably happened 1 or 2 minutes afterwards.
Wow.
Friends of his, because of the epilepsy, he had friends with him all the time in water, but they went downstairs in a very slow elevator to get some things, because Adam had a great second surgery and a good thumbs up from the surgeon. Things were looking very good. And yet life's plan, I didn't have to like it, but life's plan was that seizure was going to happen in that moment. But it was a terrible pixels. It was a poor quality phone picture. And again, one night on the pillow, the Dundurn, the publishers, they send you out and say, go see a cover that you sort of inspires us, and send me. I said, no. I said, I have the cover. It's my kid's picture, his last moments of his life, when this light shines through the solarium. It's like angels ministering to him. And he had his top off, and he posted his picture.
Wow.
And hot tub, good times. And his very last word, hashtag, is transgender. And Dundurn, as I said, will always be grateful. They did their magic. It took a long time. And one night on the pillow again, I hear very clearly Adam's voice, Dad, stop worrying about the cover. That was it.
Wow. Oh, wow. That is what a story. My goodness.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned to you earlier that I worked for Frederick Buechner, another really gifted author. And one of the essays that he wrote was called The Stewardship of Pain. And it was talking about, somebody had actually come up to him after hearing some of his story and said, Fred, you've been a really good steward of your pain. And my goodness, you are such an example of that, Rick, of, really.
I love that phrase. I love that phrase, and I'll go find that writing because I never wanted it. I didn't seek it out.
Of course.
But, I'm in a permanent place of grief and grieving. And I used to, as a minister, talk about how it is permanent because our love is permanent. So why would the grief not be permanent? And yet you do find places where you can move to gratitude and chase gratitude. And so in my new book, I'm going to have a chapter called Grief Chasing Gratitude. In the English language, for a parent to lose their child, there's not an English word for that, by the way. It's a remarkable thing. We know who orphans lose. We know who widowers lose. There's not an English word to possibly describe a parent who's lost a child.
I never thought about that.
And that's so right on. So permanently you're grieving, but you're chasing gratitude. So one day I read Jean-Paul Sartre's line that just jumped off a page. He said, freedom is what we do to what happens to us. Freedom is what we do to what happens to us. I went, oh yes, I didn't get a say about that plan about Adam, but I do have a say now about what I do with his pain and with this grief. And I don't say that, glibly. I don't, it's difficult.
No, of course.
Because sometimes I can say it and it feels like I'm handing 2 aspirins to someone. No. I said, if you can't go somewhere, you just be where you are right now. You're stuck, but there's going to come a time that you can find some choices, that you can make. And my father, Brian, was grade 9 dropout, depression, dirty 30s, in the trenches in the war. He would always, he had good reasons, never knew his dad. He had reasons to have a chip on his shoulder. And he would always, whenever we would whine as university students in the pre-email days and we'd write him a letter, he always ended his letter with, choose life, be not afraid. And of course, the St. Louis Jesuit hymn was his favorite hymn that he had on all the time, be not afraid. But I said he was afraid, and that's why he was saying it to himself, be not afraid and choose life. And so that's been a thing that I think I'm getting it from both ends. I'm getting it from my father and my kid, to choose life. But I do like that expression about the pain, and that's a powerful expression.
Well, Rick, it's really great to learn about your work and, hear about these amazing stories. I think I only feel like I've touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of all the great stories that you probably have. So I got to go read your books now. And, let's definitely stay in touch, particularly when your next book comes out.
Thank you, Brian, and keep up the good work that you do.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to speak with people like you.
Okay.